They were all gathered in the living room, sunk into soft couches that matched the cream-colored carpet Mom had never let me walk on with shoes. Hailey sat center stage, legs crossed, laughing in that polished way of hers that made people lean in. No one noticed when I stepped through the front door. I paused just long enough for the cold to catch up to me, still wearing my coat, still holding the pie I had baked that no one had asked for. I stood there on the welcome mat that said "Family is everything," and waited. Nothing. Hailey's voice carried over the hum of conversation. So then Mr. Whitaker said, "You're the first associate under 30 to lead a cross-regional report," and everyone clapped in the meeting. I thought I was going to melt. Mom let out a delighted little laugh. "Of course he did. You've always been a natural." I let the door shut behind me with a soft click. Aunt Jenna turned, startled. "Oh, Claire, you're here." "Yeah," I said. "Happy holidays." I held the pie up like a peace offering. It was still warm. Apple crumble homemade crust. I'd even bought cinnamon sticks for garnish. Jenna gave me a smile that didn't quite reach her eyes. "You didn't have to bring anything," she said. "We weren't really expecting you." "Of course not." I headed into the kitchen past the dining table along the way. White linens, gold-rimmed plates, name cards, and scripted calligraphy. Hailey plus guest sat directly beside Mom. Uncle Ted, Anita, Matt, and Jenna all had their spots. My name was nowhere to be found. The only seat left was a folding chair at the side table, the one meant for kids. It wobbled, slightly positioned near the coat rack and too far from the conversation to be included. I placed the pie on the counter and peeled off my coat. It hung heavier than usual. Maybe it was just me. Mom walked in behind me, heels clicking against the tile. "Hi, Mom." She didn't look up. "Can you take the pie out of the foil? It'll look better in the ceramic dish." I nodded. "Sure." As I worked silently, she poured herself another glass of wine, humming along to the instrumental Christmas music playing from the Bluetooth speaker in the dining room. "I heard about the company dinner," I said after a moment. The year-end thing. They're honoring Hailey." "Oh yes," she beamed, eyes lighting up now. "It's quite the production. She'll be on stage with Mr. Whitaker. Honestly, it's a good opportunity for you to see how things are done in a more structured environment." I didn't answer right away. "I mean, if you're free," she added, sipping. "You know, with your schedule." "I am," I said softly. She gave a tight smile. "Good." I scooped the pie into the ceramic dish, wiped the edges clean with a paper towel, and placed it carefully on the side counter. She didn't look at it. Back in the hallway, the same family photo hung beside the staircase, Hailey in her graduation gown, Mom beaming beside her. Dad's hand rested on Hailey's shoulder. I had taken the photo. My own graduation picture wasn't up. Neither was the launch photo from the business. I'd mailed it to Mom once, frame included. It never made it to the wall. I heard Hailey's voice again from the other room. "We're rolling out the regional metrics in Q1 and Mr. Whitaker asked me to take the lead." More polite laughter. Someone popped open a bottle of wine. I stayed in the hallway a beat longer, adjusting a crooked picture frame, an old habit, something I used to do before company came over. No one noticed then, either. Dinner was announced with the gentle clink of a glass. Everyone moved naturally to their places. I lingered by the kitchen, pretending to refill my water, waiting for anyone to ask me to join. No one did. Instead, I carried my glass over to the folding chair and sat the metal legs creaking as I settled in. The air was noticeably colder here, just far enough from the heater vent to miss the warmth, just close enough to overhear fragments of conversation, but never be included in one. From my seat, I had a perfect side view of Hailey as she laughed at something Brian said, her posture effortless, like she was born to belong. I used to think we weren't that different. Now, I wasn't so sure. Mom passed a dish of mashed potatoes down the table. It never made it to me. Aunt Jenna glanced over, once hesitated, then turned back to her conversation. I watched her choose silence. Claire, Dad called out finally. "Still doing that consulting thing?" I looked up. "Yes." He nodded like he didn't really understand what that meant. Good. Always nice to keep busy." Hailey's boyfriend Nate, I think, chimed in. "Hailey said you work from home. That must be like super chill." I smiled faintly. "It has its moments." No one asked what I did. No one asked what my clients were. No one asked how the company I built was doing. I took a sip of water. Halfway through dinner, Brian leaned across the table to Hailey. "So what's it like working with Mr. Whitaker? Isn't he like Fortune 100 level or something?" Hailey gave a little shrug, all charm. "He's intense, but he respects results. We had a client pitch last week he let me take point, said I was the only one he trusted with that account." The table murmured in admiration. Mom beamed. "That's what happens when you're exceptional." I cut into my turkey quietly, the silverware sounding too loud against my plate. I tried to focus on the food, the candles, the garland strung along the center of the table. Everything was perfect, perfect enough to remind me I didn't belong. Hailey's voice carried again. "He always says, presentation is everything. If you want the room, own it." I blinked. The phrase wasn't unfamiliar. I'd said it to her once 3 years ago when she called me in a panic before her first real interview. I had been building pitch decks since before she graduated. I'd offered advice. She'd written it down. I didn't think she remembered. Apparently she did. She just didn't remember it was mine. I excused myself after the first toast and slipped outside. The air was brisk. My breath clouded in front of me. I wrapped my arms around myself and stared out at the yard, now strung with white fairy lights and pine branches. I could hear the laughter from inside. Warm, confident, full, the kind that says, "We're all here." I wasn't. I stayed out longer than I meant to. The cold had numbed my fingers slightly, but it was quieter out there, cleaner even. No performance, no layered meanings behind smiles. Just me, the night, and the faint crackle of the neighbor's fireplace across the fence. The sliding door creaked open behind me. I turned slightly, expecting maybe my mom, or even Hailey, but it was Uncle Drew. He didn't step outside, just leaned against the doorframe holding a glass of bourbon. "You all right, kiddo?" he asked, not quite looking at me. I offered a small nod. "Just needed a breather." He tilted his glass toward the yard. "You always liked the quiet even as a kid. Never forced your way in like the others." I waited for a follow-up, a compliment, a warning, a shift in tone, but it didn't come. Just the sound of ice clinking in his glass before he went back inside. When I returned to the table, my seat had been taken. One of the cousins, Alyssa, was balancing a plate on her knees, chatting with someone across the room. I stood for a second too long, then walked over to the kitchen island and leaned against it instead. From there, I could see Hailey holding court again, her hand resting lightly on Nate's arm, as she told another story, my story actually. One I'd told her years ago about a client disaster I'd turned around. She told it well, I'll give her that. She even got the punchline right. But the I in the story wasn't me anymore. No one looked at me. No one realized. I watched her soak in the praise, nod gracefully, eyes sparkling with the attention she'd always seemed to attract like gravity. And I realized something: not all exclusions are loud. Some are quiet. So quiet they almost sound like support, like applause. When dessert came out, someone passed me a plate finally. It had the smallest slice of pie already starting to sag at the edges. I took it with a smile. Because that's what I did. I smiled. I let the moment pass. I folded myself small so others could stretch out. The evening ended with hugs and coats being gathered. I stayed to help clean up as usual. Hailey slipped out early, some party to get to. Dad kissed her on the cheek and said, "Proud of you, kid." He didn't say anything to me. Back at my car, I sat with my hands on the steering wheel, engine off. The windshield was fogging slightly. The house behind me still glowed warm, full of laughter. I didn't cry. Not this time. Instead, I reached for my phone. A notification blinked, a message from Mr. Whitaker. "Meeting confirmed. Excited to hear your expansion plan. You're the vision, Claire." I smiled, really smiled this time. And then I drove home. The following weekend was Hailey's birthday brunch, an annual Carter family affair hosted at the Oakmont, a venue that prided itself on reservations booked 6 months out, and Eggs Benedict that cost more than most people's grocery budget for the week. I arrived 5 minutes early. It was already full. The hostess looked up from her iPad and gave me the kind of smile people use when they know they've been given vague instructions. "Are you with the Monroe reservation?" "Yes, Claire Monroe." She glanced down, then hesitated. Actually, the party's under Hailey Monroe. Looks like they've already been seated. Of course they had. She led me to the private patio, wrought iron tables, linen napkins, and soft jazz playing just loud enough to muffle awkward silences. The long table was nearly full. Hailey sat at the center, radiant in cream silk, framed by flowers and laughter. To her left, Mom. To her right, Dad. Her friends from work lined the table along with two of her sorority sisters and an editor from Modern Interiors. I wasn't on the seating chart. There were no place cards, but the spacing spoke for itself. Glasses, napkins, utensils meticulously arranged. No gaps. The hostess looked at me apologetically. "Would you like me to bring out an extra chair?" "No," I said quickly. "It's fine." Hailey noticed me then. She waved, cheerful as always. "Claire. You made it." One of her friends shifted slightly, offering a sliver of space between two chairs. I squeezed in, knocking a fork off the table in the process. A waiter came over and handed me a menu without a word. I tried to settle in, tried to make small talk, tried to laugh when they laughed, even when the joke was about the startup world being full of kids who think they're the next Steve Jobs just because they bought a hoodie and raised seed money. They weren't talking to me, but about me. Hailey caught my eye then, just for a second, and offered a soft smile as if to say, "Don't take it personally." I didn't, because personal implies closeness. At one point, the editor leaned in. "You two sisters both work in design?" Hailey laughed lightly. "Sort of. I do interiors. Claire's more corporate strategy." "Oh," the woman turned to me, like consulting. I opened my mouth, but Hailey jumped in. She helps companies fix things, restructure, pivot, that kind of stuff. She's great with spreadsheets. The woman smiled politely, already looking away. I took a sip of water. Later, when the birthday toast came, Mom stood up with her wine glass. "To my brilliant daughter, Hailey. You've always had an eye for beauty, and it shows in everything you do." Hailey beamed. Dad added, "You bring people together, kid. That's a rare gift." No one mentioned me. I was sitting right there. A knife rested on the edge of my plate, perfectly still. My name hung in the air, not forgotten, just unspoken. After the toast, Hailey opened a few gifts: a leather-bound planner, a scarf from Paris, a custom sketch of the Monroe house from an architect friend. I'd brought a box wrapped in simple gray paper. Inside was a first-edition book on Scandinavian functional design, her favorite style, or so she'd once said. She opened it last, blinked. "Oh," she said. "Thanks, Claire." She didn't pass it around, didn't even set it near the other gifts, just slid it beneath her chair. I smiled again. Of course I did, because some moments don't need confrontation. They just need remembering. When the check came, Hailey raised a hand. "Put it all on my card. Seriously, don't argue. It's my treat." A few laughed. "Well, interior design does pay well," someone quipped. "She just landed that luxury condo contract right," another chimed in. Mom leaned toward the editor. "We're so proud of her. She's always had drive and taste." No one asked what I'd been working on lately. I left before the coffee was poured. Outside, I stood for a moment on the curb watching the valet try to manage a line of black SUVs and luxury sedans. Mine wasn't among them. I'd parked a block away like I always did. Hailey once joked that I was practical to a fault. I walked the long way back to my car. The book I'd gifted was still in my mind, tucked beneath Hailey's chair like a mistake. The next day, I opened my email to find a forwarded message from Mom. "Hi, honey, thought you might want to see Hailey's feature in the upcoming Young Designers to Watch issue. Your dad and I are just over the moon." Attached was a PDF spread, Hailey posing in a minimalist white suit seated on the edge of a velvet chair. The caption beneath her photo read, "A curator of elegance with a pulse on generational trends." There was no mention of the family firm. Hailey had started out under Carter & Co., our parents' consulting boutique. I'd joined first years ago, handling operations strategy, growing it from 3 clients to 20. When Hailey came in, she brought charm. Clients loved her. Dad loved that they loved her. Eventually, Carter & Co. became Carter Creative. The website changed. My name disappeared from the About page. The firm shifted from strategy to brand storytelling. Hailey told me it was just evolving. I didn't argue. That week, I ran into one of our former clients at a Chamber of Commerce mixer, a real estate CEO I'd helped restructure after a brutal Q3. "Claire," he said, surprised, "didn't expect to see you here. I thought you'd gone full-time at Carter Creative." I smiled. "Not quite." He frowned. "Shame. Your plans saved us. Never told you, but we closed that Series B because of your pitch deck." I thanked him and we moved on. But later, he mentioned how polished Hailey was on their rebrand. "She has great instincts," he said. She did. She also had a knack for stepping in when the mess was nearly cleaned up. Back at my apartment that night, I sat at the kitchen table, a pile of Hailey's press clippings spread out beside my laptop. She was everywhere lately. Podcast interviews, Instagram takeovers, panels on design and leadership. I wasn't jealous. Jealousy implies wanting what someone else has. I didn't want Hailey's spotlight. I wanted recognition of the foundation I'd built beneath it. Around 11 p.m., a message lit up on my screen. It was from Hailey. "Hey, just wanted to say thanks again for the book. It was sweet of you to remember that lecture from college. I know I probably never said it enough, but you always had the best memory." I stared at it for a moment, then typed, "You're welcome," and left it at that. Because some acknowledgments feel like rain on dry ground, you want to believe it means something, but the cracks are still there. 3 days later, I stopped by my parents' house to drop off some documents Dad still kept me on as a silent partner, whatever that meant now. The foyer smelled like cinnamon and fresh wax. Linda was in the kitchen humming while slicing apples. "Oh, Claire," she said, glancing up, "I didn't know you were coming." "I texted," I replied, holding up the folder. She wiped her hands, took it, then glanced toward the dining room. "We're doing a little tasting for Hailey's launch party, figuring out hors d'oeuvres." I nodded. "Do you need help?" She hesitated, then smiled. "No, sweetie." Hailey brought her team. From the dining room drifted the sound of laughter. I caught a glimpse of Hailey standing at the head of the table, gesturing with a skewer of something gourmet. Her assistant scribbled notes. A chef in white placed tiny plates in a row. I didn't belong in that room. Not anymore. As I turned to leave, I heard Linda's voice behind me. "You really should think about rejoining the firm. Even part-time. Hailey's been asking." I paused. "Rejoining? You know what I mean? Consulting, behind the scenes." The words were light, but they landed with weight. Behind the scenes. The same way I'd always been. I left without saying anything else. That night, I opened a drawer in my bedroom and pulled out the old notebook, the one from the early Carter & Co. days. Client names, growth plans, budget notes in my handwriting. My handwriting. I ran my fingers over the ink. My work was never glamorous, but it had been real. It had held up the house before they built the facade. In the morning, I got a voicemail from Aunt Margaret. "Claire, honey, I saw the feature on Hailey. So lovely. You must be so proud. Listen, I wanted to ask, do you think she'd be willing to review my friend's condo layout? It's not a huge job, but, well, her name carries weight now." I sat with that message for a long time, then deleted it. By the end of that week, I knew what they saw when they looked at me, a quiet background figure. Reliable, unremarkable, and somehow replaceable. But I also knew what they didn't see, the spreadsheets I'd stayed up until 2 a.m. building, the vendor relationships I'd negotiated, the crisis PR plans I'd drafted that kept the firm from folding in 2016. They didn't remember because I'd never asked them to. Maybe that was on me. Maybe I'd been too quiet. But that was about to change. It was raining the morning I met with Mr. Whitaker. Not in some grand boardroom or glossy firm, just a quiet cafe on the edge of the city, the kind with crooked tables and mismatched mugs. I'd reached out under the guise of reconnecting, a catch-up I'd called it. He had been a mentor once. One of the only people who had seen me before the firm was Hailey's playground. He arrived on time, shook out his umbrella, and gave me the same warm smile I remembered from years ago. "Claire," he said, "you look the same?" "Steady." I laughed. "Steady's not very exciting. It is in a storm." We ordered coffee. The rain pattered on the windows like a ticking clock. He glanced at me after our first few sips. "So he said I saw Hailey's name on the client list for the Murrow renovation. Big job." I nodded. I scoped that project 3 years ago. He looked at me over the rim of his cup. I figured. There was silence, the kind that doesn't need filling. Then he leaned forward, voice lower. I always wondered why you stepped back, Claire. I blinked. It wasn't just one thing. That's how it usually goes. But I've seen Hailey's pitch decks. Flashy, fast. She knows how to shine. But she doesn't anchor things. You did. The words sat heavy between us. I didn't mind the shadows, I said after a moment, but I didn't expect to be erased. His jaw tightened slightly. They didn't erase you. They just assumed you'd never ask to be seen. I didn't know what to say to that, so I just nodded. We spoke for another hour, business clients, old stories. Then, just as he was leaving, he reached into his coat and handed me a slim folder. What's this A firm I consult for? They're looking for someone with experience. Discreet strength, if you will. I smiled at the phrase. You think that's me? I know that's you. And then, he was gone, umbrella, slicing through the rain. Back in my car, I didn't open the folder. Not yet. I just sat there, engine off, listening to the soft tap of water on the windshield. That night, I cooked dinner for myself, something I hadn't done in weeks. No microwave, no takeout. Just me, a pan, and the quiet hum of my apartment. I didn't tell anyone about the meeting. Not Hailey, not Mom, not even Aunt Margaret. It wasn't secrecy. It was self-preservation. For once, I wanted something to grow before it was touched by other people's assumptions. I wasn't ready to say anything, but something inside me had shifted. Not loud, not dramatic, just steady. A week passed before I saw them again. Hailey had invited the family to her apartment downtown. A pre-renovation dinner, she called it, one last meal before the designers came in before she made it hers. I arrived on time like always. The elevator ride felt longer than I remembered. Or maybe it was the silence inside it, broken only by the soft click of each floor passed. When the doors opened, laughter spilled into the hall. Familiar voices, familiar rhythm, like music from a life I used to belong to. I stepped in quietly. No one turned right away. They were all gathered near the kitchen island, glasses in hand. Hailey stood at the center, her red dress hugging every line of confidence she'd cultivated. Mom was near the wine rack holding court, her voice cutting clean through the room. "Oh, Claire, you made it," Hailey said like she'd just remembered I existed. I nodded. "Thanks for the invite." She walked over, kissed the air near my cheek. Her perfume was sharp vanilla and ambition. "I wasn't sure you'd come," she said. "I said I would." She smiled tightly. "Right. Of course." Dinner wasn't seated, just small plates, wine people leaning against furniture like it was all staged for a catalog. I found myself standing near the bookshelf, alone again. They hadn't saved me a plate. I poured myself a glass of water and stood there sipping slowly. Across the room, Hailey told a story about a pitch meeting. She mimed someone's reaction, and the room laughed on cue. I saw Dad's shoulders shake. Mom tilted her head just slightly, pride resting on her like a shawl. And then I said, Hailey declared, "Why hire someone who needs training when I already know the specs?" And the guy, he froze. Another laugh. I swallowed. That story wasn't hers. It was mine. I'd told it at dinner 3 years ago after a project downtown. She had been there, listening, taking notes apparently. I didn't say anything, didn't interrupt, didn't correct. Instead, I moved closer to the balcony door, slid it open, and stepped outside. The air was cooler, quieter. The city hummed below. Behind the glass, they laughed again, a perfect frame of who belonged and who didn't. I let the glass door stay ajar just enough that I could still hear the clink of forks and the gentle thrum of conversation, proof that I was near but not in. Then I pulled out the folder Mr. Whitaker had given me, not to read it, just to feel it in my hands. Something of my own, something untouched. The door behind me slid open. It was Aunt Margaret. She didn't say anything, just joined me holding a cup of tea she must have brought herself. We stood there for a long minute. "You okay?" she finally asked. I nodded. "I'm just remembering." She looked through the glass at the others. "You always did see things clearer from the outside." I didn't respond. Because she was right. Aunt Margaret sipped her tea, then quietly said, "You know, I told your mom years ago you had something in you they'd never understand. Still think that?" I didn't answer. I just breathed through the ache. Inside, Hailey raised her voice again. So when the investors looked at me like I was bluffing, I slid the spreadsheet across the table and said, "That's profit over projections." Boom. More laughter. Mom clapped. Margaret chuckled dry, not amused. "You were the one who wrote that analysis, weren't you?" I nodded slow. She found it on my hard drive. The silence that followed was thicker than the wind. "Claire," she said finally, "don't wait for their permission." I turned my eyes to the skyline. I'm not. Not anymore. It was the first time I'd said it out loud, and it didn't shake the room, didn't crack the sky. But something in me settled like a puzzle piece found its corner. When we stepped back inside, they were serving dessert. Someone had brought lemon bars from the bakery downtown, my favorite, oddly enough. There were 2 left on the tray. Hailey picked up one bit into it with a moan. "Ugh, these are addictive." Then she paused, glanced at me. "Oh, you like these, don't you?" she said as if remembering something from a quiz show. I shrugged. Not really. The lie slid out smoother than the truth would have. Aunt Margaret caught my eye. Then she walked to the kitchen, opened the pantry, and pulled out a napkin. She wrapped the last lemon bar and tucked it into her purse without a word. No one noticed. But I did. Later, as people gathered their coats and hugged goodbye, I stayed by the bookshelf again, flipping a photography book open to a random page. I didn't read, just touched the edges. Mr. Whitaker had left me a voicemail earlier that day. Something about signatures and final filings. I hadn't returned the call yet, not because I was unsure, but because I wasn't ready to make it real in their world just yet. As I turned toward the door, Mom approached. She gave me a smile, the kind that felt practiced. "Thanks for coming, Claire. It means a lot to Hailey." I met her eyes. "You're welcome." That was all. No explanations. No defense. She hesitated, then reached out, touched my arm lightly. "Good night," she said. I watched her walk back to the others. Hailey was holding court again, this time recounting a childhood story that had somehow become hers too. I opened the front door. The hallway was quiet, warm, with the scent of fresh paint. And as I stepped out, I heard Margaret's voice behind me. "You still have that file I held up my bag. Never left me." She nodded. "Then let's talk soon." I smiled. Soon? And then I left. Not because I was done with them, but because I was just starting with me. I hadn't planned to go to the alumni brunch. It was the kind of event where everyone smiled too long and remembered you only by who you were, not who you'd become. But Mr. Whitaker had invited me personally, said there were people I should probably meet. His voice had that weight again, measured, expectant. So I went. The hall was full of polished wood, soft jazz, and too many cufflinks. I wore a navy wrap dress and low heels. Understated. Clean. The kind of outfit that gave nothing away. Hailey was there, of course, center table, 2 glasses of mimosa, all ready and laughing with a woman I recognized from her law firm's LinkedIn page. She hadn't seen me yet. I took a table in the corner, just close enough to be in the room, just far enough to be forgotten. Then I saw him, Mr. Whitaker, in his usual tailored gray, scanning the room like a man reading a chessboard. When our eyes met, he gave the briefest nod. Not a greeting, a signal. He didn't come over right away. Instead, he worked the room slowly, deliberately, until he reached my table near the end of his loop. "Claire," he said, pulling out the chair beside me. "Glad you came." I smiled. "You don't strike me as the brunch type." He smirked. "Neither do you." He leaned in, voice low. "I sent the docs, the final merger agreement. It's clean. We pulled your name out of the operating list just like you asked, but the control structure is untouched." I nodded, heart thudding once, just once. He reached into his folder and slid a single sheet toward me. "Initial here, if you still want it off the record." I looked down at the line next to my name. Claire Monroe, primary founder. I didn't pick up the pen. Not yet. He noticed. Didn't push. Instead, he said, "I ran into your sister earlier." Of course he had. She told me you were between jobs. I smiled, almost laughed. She tells that to everyone. Mr. Whitaker watched me carefully. Then, almost too casually, he added, "Funny thing, she pitched me on a real estate fund last week." Let me guess. Her idea, her team, her vision. "And your numbers," he said. My hands tightened in my lap. He folded the paper back into his folder. "You don't owe me an answer today. But just so you know, if you don't sign, she'll think you never built it. If you do, well, she'll still talk, but not as loud." Before I could respond, his phone buzzed. He stood. "Think about it." And Claire. "Yes. When the right time comes, don't whisper." Then he was gone. The brunch wound down with the slow unraveling that always followed these events, people standing half out of their seats, goodbyes that lasted too long, and forced laughter echoing off high ceilings. I stayed seated. Across the room, Hailey was holding court again. A different crowd now, 2 younger associates, 1 senior partner, and a man I vaguely recognized from a local business journal. Her laughter floated over to my corner table, light and deliberate. She spotted me. For the first time that day, her face shifted. Not surprise, not delight, something else like calculation cut with hesitation. She made her way over a half-empty champagne glass in hand, her heels tapping a rhythm too rehearsed. "Well," she said, smiling like it hurt. "Look who finally decided to show up." I stood, keeping my hands calm by my sides. "Just catching up with old friends." "Oh, I didn't realize Whitaker counted as old friends." I didn't answer. She sipped, then lowered her voice. "You know, Claire, I told him you'd probably want to fade out quietly. That the whole startup phase was your thing, but the scaling, that's more my lane." "Is that what you told him?" I said, still smiling. "It's what you told me, remember?" Her tone sharpened. "When you walked out 3 years ago." I took a breath, slow and steady. "I didn't walk out, I stepped back." "Same thing." "No," I said softly. "It's not." There was a silence, not long but long enough for both of us to hear it. She leaned in, voice low. "He's vetting me, Claire. I'm this close to securing anchor investors. You coming back into the picture now, it's messy. Messy for who you don't belong here anymore." There it was. The real thing beneath the champagne and charm. The need to erase me, rewrite me, reduce me to a footnote in her highlight reel. I didn't flinch. "Do you remember the name on the original patent filing?" I asked. She blinked. "That software you're pitching, it started on my kitchen counter, with a whiteboard and 4 lines of code." She laughed. "You always get sentimental when you're cornered, but I wasn't cornered. I was calm." "You're scared," I said, "not as an accusation, just an observation. That's why you're here talking to me instead of networking with them." She didn't respond. Not directly. Instead, she drained the last of her glass, set it on my table without asking, and turned away. But before she walked off, she looked back over her shoulder. "He won't choose you." I didn't reply. She was already walking away. After she left, I stayed seated. I didn't check my phone. I didn't rush to speak with Whitaker. I let the weight of her words settle not on me, but around me. The people nearby, the ones who'd politely ignored us earlier, now shifted in their seats. They'd heard enough to wonder, and that was enough for now. By the time I stood, the room had thinned. The last few guests lingered by the lobby exit, exchanging air kisses and promises to meet up soon. I walked through them like a thread pulled loose, quiet, unassuming, but connected to everything. Whitaker was standing near the valet, checking his watch. He didn't see me until I was nearly beside him. "Claire," he said, half startled. "I was hoping to run into you again." "You did?" He smiled. "Listen, I've been reviewing some of the early-stage IP filings, and I came across something interesting, your signature." I didn't blink. "I just wanted to confirm," he continued, lowering his voice. "You never officially signed over equity during the merger. You gave up operational duties, yes, but your shares remained untouched." "I know," I said simply. He studied me for a beat. "She didn't mention that." "She wouldn't." His gaze held mine. "Are you planning to return?" "I haven't decided yet." He nodded slowly. Well, if you do, I think the board would be very interested in hearing from you, not just as a founder, but as the rightful majority shareholder. I didn't answer right away. Instead, I glanced toward the valet stand where Hailey was standing, arms crossed, eyes fixed on us. I gave her a small, unreadable smile, then turned back to Whitaker. Let me know when the next board meeting is. He nodded, something unreadable flickering across his face, respect maybe, or recognition. By the time I walked outside, the afternoon sun had shifted, casting longer shadows across the pavement. Hailey was still there, frozen halfway into a conversation with one of the remaining guests, but her eyes were on me, and mine were on the Blacktown car pulling up to the curb. The driver stepped out and opened the door for me without asking for my name. The small group turned momentarily confused. Whitaker said nothing. Hailey said nothing. But the silence that followed was louder than any confrontation could have been. I stepped into the car, adjusted the hem of my coat, and didn't look back. Sometimes the most powerful sound isn't a declaration, it's the absence of denial. The company gala had always been Hailey's moment. Every year she made sure the invitations bore her name first, even though the company bore mine. She selected the venue months in advance, curated the guest list like it was her own wedding, and ensured photographers caught her at just the right angle, under just the right lighting. This year was no different, except I was on the guest list. Technically, when I arrived, my name tag was missing. The attendant at the registration table flipped through cards, then looked at me like I was the one confused. Maybe someone misplaced it, I offered, calm. I'll go check with the event coordinator, she stammered. I waved her off. Don't worry, I'll find my table. The ballroom glittered in gold and deep navy, the color palette Hailey insisted on since their first product hit 7 figures. Everything looked impeccable until you noticed the cracks. The way some employees' eyes darted toward the exit, the stiff laughter between executives, the absence of true celebration. They'd hit a plateau. And the people knew it. I found an empty seat near the back, not close enough to be seen, but close enough to see. My table mates were junior staffers, engineers mostly. They recognized me, but weren't sure if they should speak. One leaned in, finally brave enough to ask, "Are you the Claire Monroe?" I smiled. "Depends on who's asking." He grinned nervously. My dad always talks about your early interviews. He said you were the real reason the company broke into defense contracts." I said nothing, just lifted my glass slightly. He took the hint. On stage, Hailey stepped up to the mic. The applause was loud, but not thunderous. She began her usual speech, numbers, milestones, acknowledgments. She thanked the board, her team, our late father. Not once did she mention me. When she concluded, there was polite clapping. She stepped aside for Mr. Whitaker. He adjusted the mic, paused, then cleared his throat. "I had a speech prepared," he began, "but something happened this week that made me rethink what I wanted to say." Hailey shifted in her seat just off stage. Whitaker continued, "I had the pleasure of speaking with one of this company's original architects, someone whose vision laid the foundation we all stand on today." A murmur rippled through the room, and in that conversation he said slowly, "I learned something. Something many of you, including myself, hadn't realized or perhaps had forgotten." He turned just slightly in my direction. "She didn't sign away her shares. She didn't sell her stake. She didn't walk away." Every head in the room turned. "She still owns 51% of this company." And then silence. Not the stunned silence of confusion. The sharp, crystalline kind that settles when something irrevocable has been said. When power shifts without volume. The silence was brief, but it was enough. Enough for the board members to exchange glances. Enough for the assistant VPs to stop mid-sip. Enough for the interns to look down at their name tags, suddenly unsure of the hierarchy they thought they understood. Hailey didn't move. Her face was frozen in a half-smile, eyes blinking just a bit too fast. I didn't stand. I didn't wave. I didn't even shift in my chair. I let it settle. Whitaker cleared his throat again, but now there was a softness to his voice. Claire Monroe, he said, using my full name with a kind of reverence, is still very much with us, not just in legacy, but in leadership, and I, for one, am glad she's here tonight. A few people clapped, awkward, hesitant at first, then others joined in. It wasn't a standing ovation, but it was real. It was enough. Hailey's hands clutched her champagne flute white at the knuckles. She stood quickly, striding toward the stage like she might reclaim the mic, but Whitaker stepped down before she reached it. He didn't wait for her. He walked straight toward me. I stayed seated. He extended his hand. "It's been a long time," he said. I nodded, taking his hand just long enough to be polite, long enough to watch things unfold. "Should have unfolded differently," he replied, voice low. "I should have known." "You weren't supposed to," I said. "That's how it was designed." The lights dimmed slightly as servers began bringing out dessert. A motion of distraction, maybe, or a return to routine. But nothing felt routine anymore. Hailey never made it back to the stage. Instead, she sat at the edge of the ballroom, her phone in hand, furiously typing. I imagined the messages, damage control, reworded press releases, some line about shared vision or collaborative leadership. I didn't care. The point had been made without me raising my voice. The junior engineer at my table leaned over again, less timid now. "Is it true?" he asked. About the 51%, I looked at him, at the wonder in his eyes, the respect. "It's always been true," I said quietly. "They just finally read the paperwork." His face flushed. "I don't think anyone expected that tonight." "Neither did they," I said. Across the room I saw my mother. She had come in late as usual, and now stood by the entrance in a slate-gray coat, her expression unreadable. Our eyes met. She didn't smile, didn't frown, just looked long enough for me to feel her thinking something, then turned away to greet someone else. It was the most acknowledgement I'd gotten from her in years. But I didn't dwell on it. A different kind of warmth was beginning to rise inside me. Not pride, not triumph, stability. For the first time in a long while, I felt like the ground beneath me was firm, like I didn't have to explain my place to anyone in the room. As the evening wore on, conversations shifted, but the energy remained altered. People were polite to Hailey, still nodding when she spoke, still laughing when she tried too hard, but it wasn't the same. There was an undercurrent now, one she couldn't control. That night, for the first time, she wasn't the center. After dessert, a small group gathered near the back patio, a glass wall separating us from the city lights below. I stood nearby, listening to someone recount a recent acquisition, when a voice behind me asked, "May I?" I turned. It was Whitaker, again, 2 drinks in his hand. He held one out. "I wasn't sure if you still liked bourbon," he said. "I never liked it," I replied, accepting the glass anyway. "But I learned how to hold it." He chuckled. "You learned a lot more than that." We stood in silence for a moment. The noise of the ballroom faded behind us. The city skyline blinked in the distance, indifferent to all of it. "Why didn't you ever tell me?" he asked eventually. "About your ownership stake, about what really happened when you left." I sipped slowly. Because it wasn't the right story yet, and it wasn't the right time. He nodded like he understood. "She tried to erase you. She did what she was taught." I said, not defensively, just plainly. "She learned how to survive. I just happened to get in the way." He looked down at his glass. "She's not going to recover from tonight easily. That's not my concern, I know," he said. "But I thought you should know some people in that room saw something they won't forget. And not just the power shift." I raised an eyebrow. "They saw you." "Stay still," he said. "They saw you let it happen without pushing." "I've spent a long time doing the opposite," I said. "Letting go is harder." A server passed by offering coffee and petit fours. I shook my head, declining both. My stomach had long since stopped reacting to sugar, or nerves. Whitaker turned to leave, then hesitated. "One more thing," he said. "That initiative you pitched 3 years ago, the Mentorship Network for Young Engineers, we shelved it. Hailey said it wasn't scalable. I remember, I found it last week, dusted off the proposal. We're greenlighting it." That was the real moment. Not the mic, not the applause, not even the frozen look on Hailey's face. This, Something I built, buried, and believed in finally being seen. "Thank you," I said. He smiled. "No, Claire. Thank you." As he disappeared back into the crowd, I stepped toward the glass wall, watching my reflection blend into the city lights. I thought about everything I hadn't said all the years I kept my voice measured, my shoulders square, my heart hidden behind competence. It hadn't been for nothing. Inside, I saw Hailey laughing too loudly again. Performing. I didn't pity her, but I no longer envied her either. And that was enough. For once, I didn't feel the need to win the room. Because I already had. Quietly. Completely. I stayed there a little longer, letting the glass cool my fingertips, letting silence settle around me like a new kind of armor, one I didn't need to wear but chose to carry, and when I finally walked back into the room, no one looked away. The next morning, the house was quiet. Too quiet. I moved through the kitchen barefoot, the marble cold under my feet. The espresso machine hissed softly. Sunlight stretched lazily across the island, illuminating a still life of empty glasses, half-eaten pastries, and a single silver earring no one had claimed. I didn't reach for my phone. I knew what would be waiting: texts, questions, half-apologies disguised as curiosity. Instead, I poured coffee into the mug I'd brought from my own place. It had a chip on the rim and a design that had faded after too many dishwasher cycles, a tiny red fox barely visible now. Hailey once teased me about it, saying it looked childish. I never explained it had belonged to our grandmother. I sipped in silence. From the hallway, I heard footsteps, soft, hesitant. A familiar rhythm. Mom. She entered without speaking at first, eyes darting toward the stove, then the sink, then me. She wore her robe from last night, her hair loosely pinned. It made her look softer, almost smaller. "I didn't think you'd still be here," she said finally. I stayed over. The guest room was empty. She nodded, fiddling with the tie of her robe. "I figured you'd want to head out early, before anyone else came around." "I wasn't hiding," I replied, calm but firm. I didn't mean she stopped, caught herself, then sighed. "It was a lot last night?" "Yes," I said, turning slightly. "It was." She walked to the other side of the island, placing her palms flat on the granite. For a moment, she didn't look at me. "You didn't tell us about the company," she said. "There were a lot of things I didn't tell you." Her eyes flicked up. "That's not fair." "No," I said. "It's honest." A pause. She shifted, uncomfortable. "We were surprised. That's all. It's a big thing. Would it have been better if I'd stayed small?" Her mouth opened, then closed again. "That's not what I meant." "I know," I said, "but that's how it always felt." The silence between us stretched, not sharp, but dense. Like fog you had to walk through slowly, carefully, or risk getting turned around. Finally, she asked, "Did you come last night to prove a point?" I looked down at my mug. "No," I said. "I came because I was invited. And I stayed because I belonged." She blinked once, twice. "I didn't plan the mic moment," I added. "That wasn't for them. It was for the young woman. I used to be the one who waited outside conference rooms, while Hailey got introduced as the promising one." Her hands curled slightly on the counter. "She's not all bad," Mom said quietly. "I never said she was," I replied. "But she made choices. And so did I." I didn't need to raise my voice. I didn't need her to agree. Some truth just needed to be said out loud in morning light over coffee, and then left there between two people who finally saw each other differently. I left her in the kitchen not because I was angry, but because there was nothing left to argue. Some clarity doesn't come from confrontation. It comes from choosing not to explain yourself again. Upstairs, I found Hailey's room half open. Her suitcase sat by the dresser, already zipped. She was sitting on the edge of the bed, scrolling through her phone, with her shoulders slightly hunched like she hadn't slept much. She looked up when she saw me. "You're leaving?" I asked. She nodded. "There's a flight in 2 hours." Silence again. She tapped her phone screen, locked it, then placed it face down beside her. "I didn't know Mr. Whitaker was coming." "That makes 2 of us," I said. Hailey gave a dry, humorless laugh. "He's never even looked at me like that." I didn't respond. She reached down to adjust the strap on her bag. He called me last night after everything, asked if I needed time off. That was considerate. She paused. He also said he hoped I'd learned something. That humility wasn't a punishment. It was a gift. I raised an eyebrow. She stood, walked over to the window. You think I'm spoiled? I think you've always been told you were the only one who mattered. That hit. She turned slowly to face me. And what do you think now? I took a breath. I think you're figuring it out. Her eyes glistened for a second, then cleared. I thought I was doing everything right. The good daughter. The golden one. But last night, the way he said your name, it was like I was seeing you for the first time. I held her gaze. He didn't just respect you, she continued. He admired you. I didn't reply. I didn't need to. She stepped forward, stopping a few feet away. I don't know if we'll ever be close again. That's not up to me. No, she said. It's up to whether I can be someone worth knowing. The words didn't come out perfectly. They weren't meant to. But they landed. I nodded once. Just enough. Downstairs, I could hear suitcases being rolled across hardwood. Footsteps. Movement. Life going on. She picked up her phone, slung the bag over her shoulder, and walked past me. At the doorway, she paused. You're impressive, Claire. It was the first time she'd said my name like it meant something. I didn't say thank you. Instead, I gave her a small smile, the kind that's quiet but lasting. Then I turned toward my own room, not to escape her, but to reclaim the space that had never truly felt like mine, until now. That night, the house felt different. It wasn't quieter, just clearer. Conversations still hummed downstairs. Dishes clinked. Someone laughed too loudly. But none of it cut through me like it used to. I stood by the window in the guest room, the same one I'd been assigned since college. It faced the backyard where the lights from the evening still glowed faintly along the stone path. I saw Dad walking back from the tool shed, hands in his pockets, head slightly bowed. He didn't notice me watching, and I didn't wave. Instead, I moved to the old wooden desk near the bed and opened my laptop. A single email blinked at the top of the inbox, request to update board records. Ownership confirmation, Claire Monroe, 100%. I didn't reply right away. Instead, I clicked into the folder labeled Carter Design, Archive. Dozens of files stared back: blueprints, marketing decks, investor memos. Things I'd built, shaped, protected. Things I had once been told were hobbies, not work. Things that apparently spoke louder than I ever could. I selected all, dragged them to a new folder, labeled it Legacy. Not revenge, not a trophy, just a quiet record of what was real. The knock on the door startled me. It was Mom. She didn't step in, just lingered at the frame like she wasn't sure if she had the right anymore. I wanted to say goodnight, she said softly. I nodded. Good night. She hesitated. You looked strong today. It wasn't an apology, but maybe it was a beginning. I gave her the same smile I'd given Hailey earlier. She seemed grateful just to receive it. When she left, I sat back down at the desk and finally hit send. The ownership confirmation zipped away. Downstairs, someone turned off the stereo. A door creaked. Night settled into its final form. I didn't pack. I didn't rush. I simply moved around the room, my room now, with a calm I hadn't known I was capable of. On the dresser sat a photo frame. An old family picture from a 4th of July picnic. Hailey was front and center. I was in the back half cut off. I didn't move it. I just added a second frame beside it. This one was of the company team standing in front of the newly opened flagship store. Everyone smiling, sun in their eyes, pride in their posture. I was in the center, finally. As I lay down, the sheet smelled faintly of lavender and something older, memory maybe. No music played, no dramatic finish. Just the soft rhythm of someone finally sleeping without needing to prove anything. Some victories don't make a sound, no applause, no standing ovation. Just a shift in the room so slight only those paying attention notice it. But she noticed, and that was enough.